Hi, my name is David Castillo, and I'm making this real-time video because I've had a lot of requests for it. And I put it up on a different YouTube channel a while ago in a very fast, like 700, 800% speed. So here we go, real time. It's a long video, like 2.5 hours. But there's going to be a lot of information in it. So you can see, well, first off, actually the type of ink that I'm using is mainly Eternal and Intense. You can see that I'm starting with a very dark red. I'm starting with shadows so that way I can shape my depth. You'll see that I do this a lot in videos just so I can kind of shape my piece. Various places you'll see me do this with the neck, eyes, nose, beard, lips, hair, basically the entire piece. The cheeks. Anywhere I work, I want to make sure that I have value before I add any brightness. So coming up here, I decided I didn't want too much dark red to where I felt like I couldn't go backwards. So you're going to see me work kind of opposite of where I started. So instead of starting at my shadows and lightening it up, I'm going to throw in like a mid-tone, a dark mid-tone, and a highlight, so that way I can work backwards on top of it and fade into that mid-tone with my shadow. So that's coming up here in a second. Right now I'm still just working in the shadows, darkening it up, and then you'll see me kind of switch it up real quick. The main goal here, like I said, is shape. You want your tattoo to have form. Like at first glance, you want people to recognize it. You don't want it to be all mid-tones or all highlights or all shadows to where it's just a blob. You want it to have depth and value in the piece. And so that's kind of where I'm working here. That's why I'm starting right here. I'm working on some of these shadows just so I can kind of knock it out. And it's a little bit faster this way. When you work by shaping your piece out first, you sometimes can get your piece done a lot faster because you see it come together a little bit more. So I'm just about done with these these shadows here, and then I'm going to work into my midtones first, and then probably a little bit of highlights in this neck. Right now I'm just working on saturation, just making sure that it's all extremely solid but not torn up. You'll see in this piece that it's not bleeding a huge amount because I'm not tearing up the skin a lot. It's very important that if you're going to do something where you're layering a lot of color or you're doing really heavy saturation, that you're not running too high. I think right now, if I had to guess, my hawk is probably at 9. Yeah, I would guess about 9 right now, which you could see that I'm mixing in a highlight right now to get like a mid-tone. But I'm basically at about 9 probably, which means it's as low as this specific machine will run. Like I turned it down until it will not run, then I turned it back up just until it barely started running, and I'm running at that voltage. So you can see here when I wipe, it's going to be real harsh, on off, like a paint by number. So you'll see me kind of work back over and start to darken up just little by little. And like I said, you only really have this play if you're not tearing up the skin too much, because you definitely don't want to scar up your customer or your client, and you don't want to ruin their piece or your own artwork, so you want to be very careful about how much play you think you have. This is only a technique working backwards like this over an area that's already been tattooed on if you're pretty comfortable with your level of skill. But I felt pretty comfortable, so I went ahead and tackled it. I saw this healed as well. It almost perfectly healed, but there's like a little spot, like I think it was on like the cheek or something, that looked like there was like a little like dot where it looked like he had like a pimple or something, I don't know, but other than that, it healed perfect, like exactly as you see at the end of the video. Okay, so I'm just starting to blend out here, starting to come together a little bit more. Now, the most important part is that, especially, well, no, even for black and gray, but especially if you're doing color, you really want to work with your values in the sense that they all need to be the exact same depth. And that means that if you want to put in a highlight, make sure that you have a highlight mixed in your tube. Don't just lightly tap the skin to put less dots, because it's not going to be a consistent depth. One of the most important parts about the healing process is that everything's at that consistent depth, so that way in 5 years after your client, loses skin just to the natural course of time, that they have the same amount of skin missing from their highlight areas and their shadow areas and their midtones and everything, to where it still holds true over time. So it's all falling out at the same rate. For example, let's say I was going to drill in my shadows at 3 to 4 millimeters, and then my midtones 2 to 3, and then my highlights I was going to just barely drill in, or like scratch the surface of the skin to get the lighter tones, because the ink in my tube is too light. So once 1 millimeter of dead skin is gone, you're going to lose all of that ink. And so only those midtones and those shadows are going to be there, so you want to make sure that everything is at a consistent depth. If anything I say in this video is repetitive, it's because it's very important, and this is one of the most important things. Mix your ink first in the tube or a cap, however you prefer. So mix it in the tube or the tip, and then apply it once you have the color that you like, at the same exact depth that you place your shadows. So you'll see, even when I come through here and I started on my shadows and I was going in with some midtones and a little bit of highlight, once I cut straight back in with the shadows, those shadows were still going just as deep as I initially put them in, and they were going just as deep as I put the midtones in. It's like I'm mixing the two colors. If you're good with a computer at all, or Photoshop, you can kind of think of it as pixels. Like little dots of ink are like the pixels, each pixel. If you take a bunch of alternating red, or let's do yellow and blue squares, for example, and you zoom out, you're going to look at like a greenish, kind of tealish kind of color, depending on what what color, blue and yellow, you use. So if you think of ink the same way, when you put these darker tones over those lighter tones, you're going to mix those two colors together, kind of. You're blending it, almost like a wax-based colored pencil, like a Prismacolor. Ink blends very similarly. Like, you're not just going to cover it up like you do paint. You're going to mesh the pixels together, or those little dots of ink, and they're going to become one color. You're going to see them visually through the skin together. So if you had a solid black tattoo and you put white over it, it's not going to be white, it's going to be gray. And through whatever other color skin pigment that you're looking through. The darker the skin pigment, the more tint is going to be over that, which is also very important. The reason I'm using so much warmth on this tattoo is because this guy doesn't have too much warmth to his chest right here. If you look at it, it kind of has like a really light warmth, like a yellow. There's not much redness to the skin. If he had really red skin, I would not be using red on this tattoo as much as I do. I'm using it primarily, like I said, because it works with his skin pigment. Skin pigment is very important. If you have someone with a little bit darker skin, you want to stay away from something like brown because you're not really going to see what's going on either, anyway. Just the same, if they have, like, if their skin pigment itself is like a mid-tone, you want to stay away from mid-tones 100%. You cut them out of the entire equation and you're working with nothing but shadows and highlights. If they have really light skin, sometimes you can even leave the highlights out, but you still want your mid-tones and your shadows. And vice versa. If they have a really dark skin, like shadow, then sometimes your best bet is working only highlights for some people, or only shadows to darken up what's there. Because sometimes putting like a mid-tone into darker skin can also create a whole different problem, to where even though it's a mid-tone, it's darkening up darker than their skin tone, so it's like a second highlight. A second shadow. And you don't want to create a second shadow next to another shadow, so sometimes it's best just to leave it the way it is. Okay, so enough drilling your heads in about the depth of the ink. Obviously we know shadows, midtones, and highlights all need to be at the same depth. The key here so far is not only the depth though, but you have to make sure that you're running low enough to not over damage the skin. Just take your time to get it to what you want it to look like. Also, you could see right there on the edge of the neck, I left it a little bit sharper there, while a lot of it's kind of a little bit more blended. Some sharper, some more blended than others. You want to really play with your blends. Play with your on-offs, your blacks and whites, grays. You want to make sure that the whole piece isn't black and white to where it looks like you can't make a blend. But the whole piece isn't too smooth to where it doesn't have any shape. You definitely want it to hold its form. So you want it to be sharp where you want it to be sharp, and you want to blend it where it needs to be blended. So you can see here that I'm going into some light highlights just to kind of accentuate the neck area right here. And you can see I left the ink on the skin wet, and I'm playing into it with new ink. So it's not only laying down the ink that I have, it's mixing it at the same time. And I kind of just did that just so I can use some of the old ink without dipping into the cap and dirtying it up any. And when I put it in at the top, it's going to go in darker. Since I'm working over a highlight, it's going to go in darker at the top than when it starts to mix at the bottom. And not everyone works this way, to where they maybe would have started with the highlight and thrown in, like a darker highlight or a light mid-tone right over it. But like I said, sometimes it really, really helps to blend into it. Also, what you're going to see through the course of this video is that half of it's going to be really warm and the other half is going to be more earth tone. Both work really good as skin pigments, so it just depends on what you're doing. You'll see I'll play with a little bit of greens just to kind of throw off the skin tone kind of look a little bit, like in the beard and the hair, just so I can get a little bit different look, and so it can make the warmth pop a little bit more. I want it to be really vibrant and bright. So you see here I'm working with a really light earth tone. I'm taking my time working it in up to the neck, right up against the warmth. And you can always expect it to look kind of funny until it comes together. You know, same as your artwork. You know, you just got to dig in and finish it. You know, even though it starts as nothing, you got to just bring it all together until it's one cohesive piece. So again, I'm just starting on the neck. Started with some warmth, one consistent depth. Highlights over there on the other side of the neck, all the earth tones. Same thing, one consistent depth, and just putting in each tone deliberately where I want it to be, as deep as the rest of the colors. So you can see here I'm struggling a little bit more with blending it out at the bottom. You know, you want to have it pretty smooth at the bottom, so I'm just working on my blends at the bottom, you know, a little bit more than some of the other areas. This takes mixing the colors. Sometimes it's mixing in a little bit of red with the peach just to kind of darken it up, to blend out a little bit, and then a little bit further out to the end it means mixing in the peach with more of the earth tones so they kind of blend in to each other a little bit better, because I want it to be relatively smooth right there, just kind of the hard line at top that's kind of shadowed from the beard is kind of what I'm going for here. And Eternal is a really great brand. If you don't tattoo that often, you don't want to buy too big of a bottle because some of their inks kind of dry out. So if you don't tattoo all that often, you might want to start with like 1 ounce bottles to see how they work for you before you invest in like the big bottles. But they work pretty well. They're really good inks. Intense, same thing. Intense is really good ink. Okay, so we're just kind of refocusing here. Start a new video. Okay, so this is a little bit different angle, so it's a little bit brighter. A little bit shakier while my camera guy is trying to get this situated as well, but you can see I'm working in some really dark grays just to kind of add some shadow into the color. Now, all of the grays that I'm using in this video are from Intense. None of my grays are from Eternal. Intense's grays are pretty similar. I think it's like platinum and silver. They're pretty similar. One's a little bit darker than the other, but a little bit of white can, you know, remedy that situation if you just work with the platinum. I like them because if you mix in a little bit of water when you start to tattoo, especially if you mix in some white, a little bit of gray, dip in some white to lighten it up, lightly dip into the water, and it's a really good consistency to apply the gray ink, because gray tattoos can be pretty unforgiving sometimes. I have a gray Monroe that I did recently. That'll show you how difficult the saturation can be. I did it in 2 sessions, uh, just because of the difficulty. I let them know beforehand that it would be 2 sessions, and I just wanted to make sure that the saturation was on point. So here I started with the shadows again, and I'm just kind of lightening up as I go. Most of the time I do not use white on people, but this guy was light enough, I felt, to where I could use white. So the last step of this tattoo, I'm throwing in white. But in general, white, in my opinion, is a bad idea to put into tattoos. More often than not, because any ink that you put in the skin, you're going to see through your client's skin color, just like you would a pair of sunglasses that are tinted purple or brown or yellow or red, whatever you're looking at. Like, if you look at a white piece of paper with tinted sunglasses on, the piece of paper is not going to look white anymore. It's going to look like a tint of those sunglasses. Skin pigment is very much the same way. That's why I have a problem with all the artists that post new tattoos with the white glue, like just looking as bright as it could in the photo, but as soon as it heals, they know it's not going to be there anymore, because you're going to be looking at the white through that client's skin tone. So it's a picture basically just for people that don't know what the hell they're looking at, I guess, and I have a little bit of problem with that, but that's not why I put white in this tattoo. I put white in this tattoo, like I said, because I could in this specific tattoo. But it's pretty rare that I use white solely by itself, unless I'm mixing it with another color just to kind of lighten up the color, and assuming I'm not using another light tone. You know, like I'm not going to use a yellow to lighten up an orange instead of the white to lighten it up, because that's going to give you two different values. Also, if you wanted to lighten up an orange but blend it into something else, and you might use like a really light teal, like I think Intense might make something called a seafoam green. You know, is a good way to lighten up an orange if you want kind of like a brownish kind of look to blend into something kind of neutral. But either way, for the most part, I disapprove of white being placed solely in tattoos. Okay, so we're going to head to another clip where I start working on the beard. And this is where some of the greens come into play. The same dark brown that I might have lightened up some of the neck with over the red, the really dark red, I did the same thing on the beard, but with a dark green instead. Now, like this gives me shadows in my beard that I can work with, you know, a little bit later, to kind of accentuate the warmth, like I said, that we're going to have like in the cheek, forehead, no, basically just in the face is where it's going to start to brighten up. We're going to have a lot of warmth in the face right there. I think I saved the bulk of my earth tones for just the right side of anywhere, basically where anywhere the light's going to hit. So the whole left side of the face that's shadowed is going to be all my darkest warmth, like reds, brown, like dark browns, deep reds. My even my highlights are going to be really warm. There's going to be I think it's from Eternal, called the Georgia Peach, which is my brightest warmth of the shadow when I transition into my earth tones. So I'm going to use that Georgia peach like right before I feel where my light is going to fail to hit, kind of 100%. So the Georgia peach is my transition between my earth tones and my shadows, my warmth, my really warm colors. So again, the use of this green is just to right now give shape to everything else that's going to be extremely red or earth tony or just red and brown. Basically, I'm doing this whole thing. I mean, he had pale enough skin to where I just went full force with the vibrance. It's like if you threw an image in Photoshop and just up the vibrance all the way, that's what I'm going for. I wanted it to pop off of his chest, and by the end you'll see that it most definitely did. So again, you really need shadows to make your midtones and your highlights pop, especially your highlights. So that's what I'm working with now, is just shadows that are different than the shadows that I put in the neck. It's very important that you switch up the tone. If I just used black, for example, in the beard and then black on the neck, it would just turn into, a blob. But you can see already that there's differentiation between the dark green and the dark red, even though there's not too much of a difference in the actual luminosity. You see the difference just in the tone of the color itself. And that's very important when you're working with shadows, is that just because the luminosity of a color or the darkness of the color, if you don't like that word, the darkness of the color might be just as dark as another color, the fact that it's so different in tone will still make it stand out against it, which is what sometimes makes color a little bit easier than black and gray. Although black and gray can have its own set of challenges. So as you'll see right now, I'm starting to throw in my dark earth tones into the beard. So I'm jumping away from the green here and going a little bit warmer into my earth tones. I still want the area to be shadowed, just different than the initial green that I put in. But since I used this brown initially, I still want it to smoothly transition from the green into that brown. I think intense makes a green that's something along the lines of like army green, and I just mix that into the same brown that I'm putting in now for the initial shadows. And then I'm just putting in this brown by itself and leaving space for my highlights. And the whole time, obviously, I'm wiping away from my pattern. That way, you don't lose the pattern in 2 hours. And the whole time, I'm just trying to bring focus to my highlights. In the end, the shadows are almost useless as far as what's appreciated, because they really fall to the back. They're only meant to accentuate your highlights and your midtones. So you need to make sure that your shadows are actually in the right spot so they give value to the piece. If your shadows are in the wrong spot and they don't accentuate your midtones or your highlights, then your piece will not have value, and then your shadows are really pointless. Like, they're meant to draw attention. You want them to shape your entire piece. Let your midtones and your highlights maybe like use the shadows to to bring some depth, some roundness to your piece. Here's more shaky camera for you. So I'm just making sure that I don't overpower my shadows or overdo them, and at the same time making sure that I'm shaping. The whole time I'm just trying to add shape into my to work into my highlights. I think right now I'm using still a 13 mag on the Hawk. See, this shading that I'm doing more with the brown than I was with the green is I'm doing it a little bit more linear now. That way I can kind of cut in almost like a locked look, like hair locks, locks of hair. Now I'm just trying to cut in my shadow just under the lip, as you can see, which is really important. As you'll see later, the lips is probably, I think, one of the things that I had the hardest time with on this tattoo, because everything in the piece is so warm and you want to kind of obviously have the lips not look exactly like every other thing in the piece. So it took a little bit more just reworking, recoloring, getting my mixtures right, because like I said earlier, by the time I make it there at least, once you put ink in the skin, you can still change the color of the ink that's already in the skin if you still have play in the skin to not tear up the skin. So you'll see me kind of work with that a little bit more. For now I'm just trying to shape the mouth with some highlights, so that way the flesh tone of the mouth kind of stands out a little bit. One of the things that it's easy to make a mistake on is having lips that kind of disappear into the tattoo. Sometimes with doing portraits and stuff, there's bad lighting, or it's really not focused that well. And you always want to make sure, just for the sake of the tattoo, that you're putting in the depth to accentuate the lips and kind of bring them out. Okay, so here's a less shaky, a little bit better angle. And I'm going, like I said, a little bit darker over on this side, just even though my light source is coming from that side, just for the sake of the piece. I just want to make sure that that beard is nice and dark over there to bring shape to where my highlights are going to be over there. And you'll see throughout the rest of this tattoo is that I'll go back to the green a lot, where I think I need a little bit deeper shadows, and I'll just rework some of that dark green mixed in with the brown, just to make sure that I can shape properly with my warm brown. And hopefully by now you can see the speed that I'm going, and hopefully anyone that requested this likes it a little bit more than the sped up version, and anyone that didn't see it before, I still hope that so far it's being helpful. When I put up the initial videos, they were split in two parts, and of course the second video got many more views than the first video, because all of this is kind of like I said, just kind of shaping for when the tattoo actually starts to look good, when you put in the brighter colors and it really starts to come to life. So the second video got a lot more views, but I think this is all extremely important because, like I said, the shadows are really what's going to make the rest of the tattoo pop, you know. Without these shadows, if I just did a bunch of midtones and highlights like I was saying earlier, it would not be the same tattoo at all. So you got to really, really pay, if you're not all that good at tattooing yet, or if you're still learning your artwork a little bit, you got to really focus on your highlights. On your shadows. Very, very important to focus on those shadows. I think a lot of people that wanted to learn a lot from my other version that were asking for a real time of this video, they might have missed a little bit by skipping that first part of the video. Because I guess everyone wants to see when it starts to really come together and start looking good, and they think, oh wow, this is looking good because he's putting these colors and these shakes, and it's part of it, but we can't downplay the shadows at all. Okay, so just working in a little bit of mustache, trying to add a little twist in, y'all. Now this is going to be, still green, still working in a little bit of brown in the green, maybe a little bit more with each use, but for the most part it's a pretty heavy amount of green. And like I said, the purpose of this, if you missed it earlier, is just so I have a different color shadow than the shadow over on the neck or in the hair. The hair is going to be very similar, but you try to separate the shadows so they don't just mesh together as just one blob. And a very important part is just taking your time, looking at the piece and deciding where you want those values to be. You don't want to throw a shadow in some place that you figure, oh wow, I really wish I had a highlight there, or too much warm brown up against where like a dark red's going to be, because those two colors are going to be a little too similar possibly for maybe the look that you're going for, and you'll kind of lose the shape of the piece, or lose the beard, or lose the cheek. So you want to make sure if you have two shadows or two midtones or something that are like the same luminosity or darkness or brightness, you want to make sure that you have different tones in there if you're working with color. So if you're working with like a really warm, like reddish kind of color like I have been with most of this, even the brown that I'm using over the green is really warm, you definitely want to go to something like the green, because it's going to look so much different and it's going to kind of separate the piece for you. And that's how you can get a large portion of shadows to really make the midtones that you pop in and your highlights to separate. Is you really need that separation of your tones and your shadows. not everyone's way also is to use a 13 mag for something like this, but like I said, for the most part, I wanted it to be a pretty smooth tattoo, so I just chose to go with 13 mag for a large part of it. You'll see me use like a 5-round liner for some of the elements that I want to keep real sharp in the face, you know, nose, eyes, lips, stuff like that. I'll be using a 5-round liner just to kind of drill those in, because I think anything that sharp and that small, it's going to be really difficult to do with the shader. So you want to go to something like a liner, so that way you can put it in nice and sharp and as deep as the rest of the inks, like I was telling you earlier, so that way it really holds true over time and you don't lose the shape of the eye in a few years because you're trying to like lightly brush it in with like the tip of a mag or something. Like, you want to make sure that you have that consistent depth all the time. So just playing with a little bit more shadows here. And you can see as I'm doing it, it's getting a little bit more brown with each pass, because I'm starting with a little bit of green to kind of blend it out, and then I'm working in more brown to really get a smooth blend up into, from the beard up into just below the lip right there. I would have cut some of this out for the real time, but I figured I'd give anyone who's interested as much footage as I have. So you can see when you leave the skin a little bit more muddy like this, that you can still start to take off some of the pattern. So the lips are starting to just kind of disappear a little bit. So you want to make sure that if you start to lose something like that, you start to go in there with like an outline or a little bit of shading, something to where you don't lose it. And just so that way it maintains your shape. I already basically did that with the beard in large part, just to make it pop. So yeah, of course, yeah. So you can see that's obviously the next spot I went, because that's probably what I was thinking so many years ago, is like, I need to definitely get something in here so I don't lose these lips completely. So you'll see I'm starting off with very similar tones to what I'm going to put in the face. Peaches with maybe like a little bit of pink in there. That's kind of the color that I got when I mixed the Georgia peach and the deep red. Is kind of like that mid-tone pink right here, and it just helps me kind of come up with a base for my lips that I can just play with and alter later. If I don't like the color, like I said, we can always alter the color like it's pixels on a computer. It's like cross-hatching different colors, if you will, different color markers or pens or something, kind of stepping back. You're going to kind of see those colors mesh together. So if it's a little bit easy to do if you start light like this, though, rather than start dark. Like I was saying earlier on the neck, so this is another example of, on the bottom lip at least. On the top, I started pretty dark. You can see I got a pretty dark red up there. And then here, you'll just see me keep playing with this and keep playing with it. So the bottom, yeah, so again, I started with that very light color, and I'm just working on top and trying to change the color. You want to be careful if you start with something light and you're putting something dark over it, though, that you do just kind of put some dots in the skin. You don't want like a full saturation. You want those colors to come together. You don't want to completely cover that color. You see, so you can see some spots I'm just trying to lighten up, some spots I'm trying to darken. You see right above the lip, I'm trying to just add some flesh tone into there. And little things like this can really slow you up as well. You'll see I started with like a little bit darker color right under the highlight on the lip. I know it might be kind of hard to see because it's kind of muddied up right now, but that little darkness right there really brings out the highlight in the lip, which is okay to do, and you want to fade that like right into the bottom. So you can see here, I want my lip much darker, so where it still keeps some of the red, but I want it to be a very, very dark shadow under there, because it's not only shadowed because it's the top lip, but it's also very shadowed from the beard. But I started with that red first, so that way when this heals up, that red still comes back through. And you can see it's like a very, very deep red, not just like I put like a really dark gray or a dark black or something straight over the lip and just called it a day. So you saw that as soon as I dipped down onto the skin, I realized that it was far more red than I wanted it to be. So I went back, probably a little bit of peach, a little bit of brown, just to kind of make it more of like a maroon color, like a light like burgundy kind of mix between all the colors. Just so it's a little bit different than, like I said, what I'm putting in everywhere else. And again, to have this much play in a small area, you really want to make sure you're running very low. So you can see on my right hand side how it's starting to darken up right against that highlight. And start to be a little bit brighter kind of on this left side of this face where I'm going to have this cheek highlight. So I'm just slowly just trying to work this in and make it not a big pink lip, but I don't want it red like he's wearing lipstick. I want highlights in there and reds, peaches, pink, like an even mix of all of them to where it doesn't look real dull compared to the rest of the piece, but it also doesn't look like a Jesus with lipstick on. So you can see here I'm introducing a new color. This is kind of the beard right here, like the first mid-tone that I'm putting in the beard, which I'm also fading out to the mustache over here. You can see it's also a very warm mid-tone. Again, just so I can maintain the warmth of the piece. So now I'm just cutting into all of the shapes I made with my shadows, the green and my warm brown, and just kind kind of adding to the shapes that I already put there. Also, a little warning, before you just constantly lay your hand over a tattoo like this, you obviously want to make sure that your hand is dry and the tattoo is dry. For example, if it was summertime or something, this guy was sweating up a storm, or if he was really nervous, you might have to be a lot more careful about the angle that you're tattooing at, and just rubbing your hand across the tattoo. You could see that for the most part my hand is stationary and I'm just kind of moving my fingers. Just because of, while I was making the video, obviously I want you viewers to see as much of the piece as possible, so I didn't have as much play to rotate him around or anything like that. Like, you really have to I guess know how to maneuver your machine around and get the needle in at whatever angle. Could be a little bit harder when you don't rotate people around, but as long as you're not making a video, it never hurts to rotate your customer around and get at the tattoo from a lot of different angles. So you can see on the shadowed part of the beard, it's real simple like the neck. I'm just looking for not like a solid green blob, just a little bit of inconsistency in my shading, and then a little bit of different tones in there, just so it doesn't take too much away from the face, but you can still tell that it's part of the beard and it's providing the shadow that I need it to produce. You can see there's much more in the front where I'm going to have my highlights. Like, that's where all the depth of the beard is. That's but I still use that shadow to bring that depth out and to shape all of that. The beard on the left side, the dark with most of the green, is mainly just to shape the cheek. So you can see here, now I'm tattooing with a liner. Probably, like I said, a 5-round. Some spots I'll put in a solid line, and some you'll see I'm kind of fanning the needle out so I can get a little bit of a fade to work over. I'm providing a little bit of shading with it because you don't want just a solid black blob. The eyes also are a little tricky on some tattoos, so you'll see me kind of look back and forth at the picture a lot just to make sure that I'm getting it right on the first try. You'll see here I'm patting the ink off rather than wiping it, because I'll be wiping it no matter where I wipe directly into something I haven't tattooed yet. And the last thing I want to do that with is the nose or the rest of the eyes. Now, I chose to go with black for the nostril and the shadows of the eyes, and the pupils, straight black, just so it was dark enough to really stand out. Some people might not want to go with black, but I just jumped in with both feet. A lot of people are kind of scared to use it because once it's there, you're kind of not getting rid of it. But again, some pieces, in my opinion, you really need that black to make those specific features stand out a lot. So I chose to go with it, just so these features can really stand out on the tattoo, and they'll stay true over time as well. They'll be sharp for the life of the tattoo. So you'll see here, I'm fanning out a little bit so that way I don't end up with just one solid hard line. That's either some watered down black, like a couple of dips in a rinse cup, or just some really light gray wash. I'm not really sure. It's a little bit easier to use watered down black before you use something like a gray, because it's much easier to dab off the gray wash because it's so water based. Since it's mainly water, you don't have to worry about a big blob of ink being like right in the middle of the eye and blobbing up the rest of your work. So sometimes it's good to kind of go in here and just kind of shape with a little bit of gray wash, a little bit of shading, because even once you lay color over that gray wash, since the gray wash is going to be seen together with your color, it'll be a little bit darker where you have the gray wash and color than when you just have that straight color with no gray wash. So you're still adding depth to your piece overall. You're just doing it with a way that's a little bit easier to clean up. You'll see that sometimes I might even add a little bit of brown in to my gray wash, so that way I'm almost watering down my own ink just for the sake of cleaning up a little bit. Because when you water it down with some gray wash, you can darken up a color that you want at the same time as you're making it easier to clean up, and just kind of dab off the skin or wipe off the skin, whatever you're doing. Now, this is a very important part that I'm going to be doing here in a second, is shaping the nose. With so many highlights on this face, I definitely wanted to make sure that I had a nice, dark underside of the nose. Nice dark nostril and bottom of the front of the nose. I want to make sure it's really shadowed, but also shaped the same. It can be a little bit scary to jump in with both feet if you don't really know the dynamics of a nose, because if you do something a little bit too solid, it's kind of hard to go back from, but a little bit of practice on paper, colored pencil, paint or something can definitely help you with this part of the body. Like I said, lighting has a lot to do with this. Sometimes if you're any good with like Photoshop, it's good to kind of darken certain areas of a photo that might be a little too flush, just to kind of make sure that you got it right before you jump into ink. So again here, I'm still on the 5-liner, just fanning out as I'm going. And just putting in my shadows to the underside of this nose right here. And if you missed it earlier, the purpose of this is just so I have enough sharpness to my eyes and my nose. If you saw earlier, I was explaining how some parts of the tattoo you want to be real smooth and soft, but other parts of the tattoo you want to be real sharp and crisp. The nose and the eyes are definitely parts that you want to be extremely, extremely sharp. Sometimes even, depending on the person that you're tattooing, it might even be something like a cheek that's very prominent. And sometimes you might want it like I did on this one, to where it's a little bit softer. see right there, a little bit of watered down ink, and I just kind of lined it in there so it's nice and sharp. I can fade out from it later a little bit if I want on either side, but I just want to make sure, just for the sake of the focus of the tattoo, that there's a tension being drawn there. That you can tell everything else is kind of soft, and this is very sharp. It's very prominent. It should stand off of the rest of the tattoo, kind of jump out at you. So you see I kind of fanned out from that a little bit with my liner. You can use a shader, mag, anything you want, but I'm just using the liner for it because to me it's a little bit more like a ballpoint pen, to where you can really play with it little by little. And it's all, like I said, at a very consistent depth. What's going to kind of factor how dark it is the saturation that I put in there. Whether I go over it enough times for it to be extremely solid, or if I'm just going over it very quickly to put like some dots in there. Okay, getting back to it. You'll see certain areas of this I'm adding shadows that kind of extend to the beard, or mustache rather, and then I'm still leaving space for some highlights that I'm going to be wanting. See, so just playing with it very slowly. If you're not too good at kind of shading with any kind of a liner or a round shader, you might want to maybe just go with what you know if it's like a small mag. Maybe like a 7 2-stack mag, or just a normal 7 mag, something like that. The 7 mag's a little bit bigger. The 7 2-stack can definitely easily get into a small area like that. So you'll see that I have some really dark like a red tint to that. I want to make sure that, again, I have a really dark shadow on this side of the nose to kind of bring out that highlight at the end. And like I said, just to give shape to this thing. Last thing I want is this not to have a very like prominent nose. Like, you want it to really just stand off the page here. That's why I'm kind of taking so much time with this. Just like I did with the lips, how I kind of started with my lighter tones and then I just work on a little bit darker, mix the colors as I saw fit until I had the right color and it looked right. Kind of just doing the same thing here. Working on these shadows just to kind of shape it, just very slowly, just to make sure that we have depth here. But either way, just taking your time, doing it right. You'll see that after I feel like I have the depth everywhere I need it, I'll jump straight back into my mag. But for now, everything I'm doing, I want to be extremely sharp. So I'm sticking with the liner and just putting it in there at the same depth that my mag was. Usually the throw on the needle is a give or take about 4 millimeters is generally what I run. See just a little bit of red shadow right there under the eye. Probably a little bit of brown in it as well. Just trying to add some warmth to that watered down ink that I put a little bit earlier that I was talking about. Just trying to put a little bit of color over it, just to get it looking the way I want to. And when you're working shadow first, before highlights or midtones, especially on something like a nose or lips, obviously you want to be extremely careful because it's going to be much harder to lighten up that shadow than it's going to be to darken up a midtone or a highlight. So again, before I jump into this, I'm just making sure it's right. So I'm throwing in a little bit more of a red highlight here than any kind of like brownish, kind of greenish, blackish kind of color, just so I could get a little bit of warmth over there, but it's still a little bit lighter, but it's still just variation, so you can tell that it's still shadowed, but it's different than the other side. So just working on the eye here. A little bit of brown on the eye. And still making sure that I have room for a highlight at the bottom of the eye, just to kind of bring it to life. I'm adding a little bit more shadow on that other eye back there, on the other side, just to kind of bring out the brow of the nose a little bit more. You want that to be pretty prominent. So you want the eye, if possible, to kind of draw the highlight of that nose. Like draw focus to the highlight of that nose once you get it in there at least. So working with like a little bit of a midtone on the eye now. And I'm taking so much time here because I want to make sure that these features, like I said, are prominent and they're correct. Make sure that they really pop and they're really sharp. Right above the eyes, on like the eyelid area, you'll notice that it's a lot sharper than a lot of things in this tattoo so far. I did that primarily just because I wanted them to be like strong folds more than like just like a soft blend. Wanted them to be very prominent and really draw focus, just very sharp. And that sharpness will bring focus to there later on once I get all the smooth blends into the nose and the cheek and the forehead. So you'll notice that in a lot of these areas I'm throwing highlights before I finish all of my shadows. I'm just jumping like area to area. You'll notice that sometimes I wipe straight over my highlights. I do this because I'm not damaging the skin so much to where it's just going to soak up anything I put there. So this gray that I'm putting in, this light gray, will stay as kind of like a dark highlight in this eye to kind of just give depth, like right under that eyebrow. Eyelash? No, what do you call it? Eyelid. Yeah, the gray right under the eyelid is going to really draw like a shadow there, like a very natural looking shadow, especially once the white's in there. if you're running your machine really high, or if you notice that the skin is bleeding a lot, you might not want to do highlights before your shadows. You might really regret that. Because if the skin's bleeding a lot, it's most likely going to suck anything in. If the pores are really open, like just absorb all the ink that you wipe over it. So you want to be very careful about seeing your client's skin and knowing what your voltage is at. If they're bleeding a lot, you might want to consider turning down your power supply a little bit, pulling your needle back in, making sure you're not digging, things like this. So we're about halfway through the video, maybe a little bit further. Yeah, a little bit more. Oh no, actually not quite there. We're almost half. So let's see. Again, I'm just trying to make sure that these eyebrows are dark and shadowed, kind of like the beard. But relatively sharp as well, but not as sharp as, let's say, like the pupils and the eyelid, the nostril, things like this that need to really stand out. The bottom lip, you need to be real focused on top and bottom just to kind of stand out from the beard, since there's so much going on right there. Same thing here. I want it real deep up here, so that way that back eyebrow really just leads us into that brow in the nose. And same thing, I'm just starting with a little bit of green, a little bit of brown, just to kind of draw my shadows in. Now, obviously, you know that you get much more play with the tattoo. I mean, much less play with the tattoo than if you were using something like acrylic paint, to where you can just keep layering and layering, or colored pencil where you can just keep layering, assuming they're wax-based. So it's very important that you have your concept down first, and you understand kind of where you want your shadows to be, where you want your midtones and your highlights to be. You definitely want this all to kind of come together. Even if you don't have it 100% before you start the tattoo, you want to figure it out before you put the ink in the skin. Look at it for a minute if you have to, just to make sure, have your game plan all mapped out. So now I want to get this nose to kind of start coming together. So going to work up above this eye, so that way you have a brow under the eyebrow, but also use it to make the front of the eye pop, and also the side of the nose. I want to work down into that. So this is a very important shadow to have. And it can really make or break your tattoo. So I'd say definitely try to get this area mastered before you maybe jump into something like this. I don't know about mastered. I wouldn't say I have it mastered, but you know what I mean. Try to get a pretty good idea of what you're doing before you jump into something like this. That's better. Or like I like to tell my apprentices, depending on who we're talking about, just try to do it good. Yeah, if you could do that, then I think you'll be just fine. So you'll see that now I'm just throwing in kind of like a darker midtone into some of these areas just to try to shape this nose, like I was saying. It's very important that on something like this, you probably don't want to jump straight into your darkest tone. You might notice that I darken some up later, throw a little bit of lighter tone to kind of blend in, but you just really want to work with your tones in a way to where you can always work into it a little bit more to kind of change it up how you want it to look. Because it'll always look a little bit more natural if you work in some like mid-tone, whether it's a light or a dark mid-tone. Add a little bit of highlights over that ink or a little bit of shadows in certain areas to where it's not one solid color. Although I'm not specifically going for 100% realism here, I still want it to look realistic, but in a very vibrant, bright kind of way, to where it's extremely warm, but it still has that life feel to it. I definitely need to get a tripod so I can make some more videos as well, but I have more that I'm going to be uploading as soon as this one's done, and I get it all voiced over, and that will also be in real time. One of them is, like I said, it's a gray ink, like the color gray, Marilyn Monroe. I have some, like a bird that's black and gray. I got a gray wash train that's pretty nice. Maybe a couple more that I can throw up here in real time just to kind of give you guys a little bit better idea of how long some of this work can take, the speed that I'm moving, the angle that the needle is going at, all these things. So again, I threw in a little bit of mid-tone there, and then I'm working back over it with a little bit more, a little bit darker color, probably like a really dark mid-tone, just to kind of smooth it out a little bit and get it to round where I want it to round and be a little bit more solid where I want it to be solid. And now you notice here I don't go all the way to the end of the eye. I think that's a little bit important. And I also don't go all the way to the eyelid, so that way there actually is some depth to that bottom eyelid, like a thickness to it. Without that thickness on the bottom of the eyelid, it could really throw off the whole piece. And you'll start to notice as I'm working through this piece, it really starts to come alive a lot more over time. And it's supposed to be like that. It's because, when you're working on something like this, you're just improving and improving and improving. It's a very slow process. So you'll see what I'm doing here is just adding just a little something to this nose, because I want it to pop out against this cheek back here. So I'm kind of using it as a guide and then shading out a little bit, just to where I can get that back cheek in there a little bit and make this nose like really pop out. But you see, before I hit the cheek, I'm mainly working on the line of the nose. Kind of how I said I didn't want to do earlier with like a shader. That's what I'm doing now, instead of a liner, because I don't want it to be too sharp over here, because the cheek and the eye are going to take care of that for me by a large portion, and I want it to kind of fall back a little bit more, unlike that nostril right there. So it's still going to be pretty sharp, but it's not liner sharp. Alright, so I'm starting to add some warmth over these dark shadows that I put earlier. So I'm adding a little bit of dark red in just to kind of get that nice soft shadow that I want. Because that soft shadow also brings the hardness to the nose that I want. I don't want that shadow to be too hard to where you lose that nostril. So I want it to be real soft and kind of fade out, so that way all the focus is drawn to that nostril, and it's really gonna even like bring attention just to the foreground right here, that front of that face, which will also bring attention like to the highlights of the nose, the highlights in the cheek that I'm gonna have over there, just basically the whole area. So I'm just darkening up the brow right here a little bit, and bringing that down to where I'm fading off of that highlight on the other side, or the shadow. Little dark midtone on the end of the nose, so that way I have a little bit of roundness to my nose. And you can see that I took care of losing this nose and this eye and everything, so now I have a lot more play to just wipe wherever I want. And like I said, I have that play because I'm not going straight over like skin that's bleeding all over the place and very open and overworked. So before I finish that nose, you can see I kind of switched up where I was working. It good to do that sometimes if you're not 100% sure where you want to go yet. If you've commit to something, then you've already commit to it. I went with this shadow on his flesh tone on his neck. So where I start over here is with the shadow on the cheek, same color, starting with a really deep red. I'm doing this just so I can get an idea of what I want the rest of this face to look like before I step on my own toes. And it's okay to have a ballpark idea of what you want a tattoo to look like, but that doesn't mean that you want to jump into something before it's ready in your mind, or before you know what it's going to look like with what you're planning on doing the other side. So if you already know what you're doing, just go ahead and finish up what you already made a decision on. Like I said, I started with that neck. I'm jumping to the cheek because I can't switch that tone. This tattoo would have turned out really, really horrible if I would have started with red down there and then at the end switched it up and be like, well, maybe I just want it like a natural brown, like earth tone color, and then that's what I put into the cheek up here. Or even something like a green, if I had like a dark blue or a dark green or something, or like a purple and lavender kind of look coming off of this other side, but I already made a choice on the bottom, then it's going to look like two different people did the tattoo, or like someone that doesn't really know what they're doing too much, did it, because you have to be kind of consistent with your lighting and the color of your shadows and what you're putting where. For example, if I would have changed my mind and wanted some cool colors in here, I would have done that off of my highlight from probably like the right side, so that way it will kind of meet in the middle with the blue. Or meet in the middle with the highlights of them, like blended together, depending on how you want to do it. But either way, I know what I want to do over here because I already made my choice on the neck, so I'm just going ahead and jumping in and doing that before I finish that right side of the face, where I kind of already on the neck also decided I wanted to do earth tones, but you know, if you're not 100% where you do not want the earth tones against all the warmth, then like I said, you finish what you know, wipe it off, take a look at it, and then make your decision once you kind of see how it's coming along. You know, whether you're going to throw some more warmth in the nose and take all of the focus away, or whether you're going to go with something more along the lines of an earth tone, so that way it makes those warm colors really pop. You know, your reds and Georgia peaches and such. Okay, so here I'm just working on my shadows on my reds over here, just to add, you know, same shadows that I have in the neck. Again, very important to have consistency in your piece. And of course, like I was saying earlier in the video, in case you missed it, you could do this with really any color scheme, as long as you have that consistency in where you're putting each tone. So I could have made this, you know, really warm reds like this on one side, and instead of earth tones, I could have went more like light blues. For like cooler colors, maybe like a little like lavender on the right side where my light source is coming from. I could have just done normal browns and earth tones for the reds right here, for example, and then done like a really bright light source, or done a little bit of like a light warmth, like mainly like the peaches over there on the right as my light source, and kind of like reverse this piece, all my shadows and highlights. So if you listen to this video properly, it's not actually showing you just how to tattoo this exact portrait, but there's enough information in here for you to be able to separate any tones that you want to do, any color scheme, as long as you follow, you know, the basics of what I'm trying to explain over here. Make sure that what sharp needs to be sharp, and what is, you know, blended smoothly is blended smoothly, that your shadows are in the right spots, and they really bring focus to your midtones and your highlights. So, like I said, I just went with this color scheme because I thought it would be really warm and really bright. So I'm just trying to cut in some shadows over here on the left side, and trying to kind of make the forehead a little bit more prominent, and the the brow right there kind of pop out a little bit more. As you can see, I'm not going all the way down to that cheek because I want to leave like a little highlight in that cheek. So right there, I'm just mixing in a little bit of peach like I did earlier, just to kind of get a little bit of a mid-tone so I can blend into some highlights. If you wanted something a little bit warmer, this is where you might want to start mixing into something like a blue, like right here in this cheek where I'm working, to kind of start working into that highlight a little bit. And also you want to decide whether you want to, if you were going to use a cool color to blend into, you want to decide whether you're going to do it here or just on the other side and kind of make them meet in the middle with your brightest highlight. Or if you are going to start it right here, need to decide whether you want it to be a hard highlight or if you want it to blend real smooth, in which case you would kind of mix the colors together gradually to where you slowly work into that new color, or whether you just jump right into your coolness with a very hard highlight from like a very extreme light source, like a light right on someone's face might be a little bit harder than a light that's reflecting off of something, off of a wall or something. They're going to be much different highlights. So a little bit of trial and error, like I said, before you get to the tattoo can really help with that, just to make sure it's what you want it to look like. On this specific tattoo, this person just happened to walk in that day and ask for this, so I didn't have too much preparation for something like that, because he was just like, yeah, let's do this right now. I think it was already like pretty late in the day by the time he came in, so I kind of just went over this color scheme with him. He liked it, so we just jumped right into it. But especially if you have appointments, you have all the time in the world, or if you have a client that is willing to wait for you to come up with that, then I would definitely recommend that as well, as long as you're not a procrastinator. You know that better than me. So sometimes if you're the kind of person to kind of put off the design for a little too long and lose a customer, you probably don't want to go that route. But you also don't want to jump in and rush something and ruin it as well. So I guess gotta pick your battles, I guess. So enough about that. So I'm still working in some light highlights here. You're gonna start to see this piece really come to life a little bit quicker. Right now I'm just working in that peach for the very first time by itself. Every other time I've mixed it into another color. And then you'll see me lighten this color up as well, just to kind of finish off my highlight. And you can see this cheek is relatively smooth, but it's still, that dark red over there gives it a pretty harsh line as well. So I'm trying to make, in the end, I want the highlight to be a little bit smoother, but that shadow to be a little bit sharper. So it has like a clear cut edge, like he's got a very prominent cheekbone. I'm just getting under the brow here, doing the same thing, getting this highlight in so it pops out a little bit. And see, the warmth really sets off against his specific skin tone. Like I said, If he had a different skin tone, a little bit more red, I probably would have went with cooler colors on this just because it would have looked better on his skin tone. But for his specific skin tone, like I said earlier in the video, I wanted to go the warmth because the warmth is going to stand off of his particular skin pigment very well. You know, if he had really dark skin pigment, I probably would have recommended something like black and gray, if at all possible, and probably left out most of my midtones and just worked mainly on highlights depending on how dark his skin was. And if it was a girl, we'd have those nipples covered up because you can't have that shit on here. So here you can see I got the lighter peach coming in here. I probably used white instead of yellow to lighten this up, just so I wouldn't come up with a color that's, you know, a little too orange. And so you can start to see the face really start to, you know, come together finally with these highlights. Now the forehead. The forehead sometimes, like I was talking about earlier, you might want to, you know, start doing what I'm doing here. You just kind of work in your midtones and your highlights first. Get the glare that you want on that forehead, and then you can always darken up your shadows or your midtones gradually as you come out once you have that light source right. But you'll see once this forehead is done, before I jump into this hair, how all the sharpness that I put into the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, and all the warmth that I put into the face, how everything just kind of pops out, kind of stands out at you. So once I finish this up and wipe it off, you'll get a really good glance at it, and you'll really start to see this face pop off the skin. Once that's done, the remainder of the video is basically almost a repeat of the beard. A little bit longer strides and bigger locks, but that's basically it. So you can see here I'm just putting in a really bright highlight into this nose against that soft line that I put in there earlier. I'm just trying to get this this nose popping out of the skin a little bit more. I'm going back into that shadow of that nose, and you see how that red kind of adds some warmth to that shadow that I was adding right there, but it makes it pop more than just leaving his skin right there. And little things like that will make a piece look way different, because now it pulls the back of the nose back a little bit, but still adds that warmth to it, to where it looks completely different than it did before it did like 2 seconds ago. Okay, so here's the first wipe that I was talking about, where you can really see all of these tones. You can see the sharpness of the eyes and the softness in the highlights of the cheek, but a real strong jaw right here. Everything's really starting to come together here. And like I said, you just take your time with it and work it in very slowly. Run real slow and be sure about everything that you're doing. You know, don't put a highlight somewhere where you're not sure, or not sure why you're putting it there. You know, don't put a shadow somewhere if you're not sure why you're putting it there. Have everything figured out in your head, on paper, pixel, canvas, however you got to do it. Get there first. Okay, so you can see here I'm just kind of working on that blend in the cheek a little bit more, using, you see I'm darkening up here. I started light like I was telling you could do on the forehead, and I'm just kind of darkening it up. It's hard to tell because of the glare, but you'll see me kind of dip in some white after I use the lighter tone, like right above that eyebrow right there. I dipped into some white just to add like that little highlight over that eyebrow. So I put it in kind of dark on the cheek, dipped in some white, and got that highlight over that eyebrow. You don't always have to rinse. Like if you know you need that color somewhere, you could save a lot of time by just getting that specific tone in there. Okay, so we cut out the other side of the face right here and most of this. I figured you guys have a pretty good idea of that right side of the forehead. If you're curious about why it looks different, watch the rest of the video. No, but on the neck, I was talking a little bit like at the very beginning of the video after I was done with the reds down there. I was talking about the earth tones that I was using, and obviously I use those same earth tones, so they're not so warm, they're a little bit more neutral looking, right up there on the forehead. Okay, so I'm just doing a little bit of the background hair. The foreground right here, you can see it's not as warm as what I'm putting in the background, farther away from this light source. That's because I'm using the same shadows that I used in the beard, basically the army green mixed in with that dark brown, just to get a real dark shadow that's different than the dark red that I put in case you missed that earlier. Because since they're the same brightness or luminosity, they're like just as dark as each other basically, you want some variation in the tone. And I was explaining earlier that we have that play a little bit more because we're working in color. Black and gray, you might have to do things a little bit differently or just have it all shadowed, but we'll get to that once we do a black and gray video. Because the black and gray, I'd say, is more just about your separation of tones, as far as separating luminosities, I guess is more how to say it. I guess it's the same thing in black and gray, but in color we really get that play to where we can have a green shadow and a red shadow right next to each other, and we have variation still. So it comes in handy definitely to separate your tones like that, because you can still have shadows in all the places that you want the shadows, to accentuate your midtones and your highlights. Okay, so now I'm just starting to work in the bottom a little bit, trying to finish this off. Still just working on some midtones. I haven't really got to many of the highlights in the hair. It's still just real. I'm still just shaping it, just trying to get the flow of the hair that I want. And hair is always, up in the air. You can choose to put a lot of detail in it, choose to make it real soft and leave a lot to like kind of the imagination, just more like where your highlights are, kind of like you would see in real life. You could do it a little bit more like this, where I'm doing it like in the locks. It really just depends on the style that you're going for. Since I'm using the browns and the reds are so warm, I didn't really feel like putting a lot of midtones in there would take away from the face. So I just went ahead and just threw them in there. You'll also notice that for the most part, I put a lot more shadows closer to the shadowed part of the face, so that way that whole area is kind of shadowed on the side of his face, and then there's the light source almost like coming from the back. You're rounding off, almost like there's like I was saying earlier, like there's like a reflection from something. And you can see here, so my highlights won't be too harsh right up against the face. I'm just kind of working from the face into my hair with a mid-tone of a brown, like an earth. It's still pretty warm. It's still a pretty warm brown to match the piece, but it's still an earth tone, much more than the reds. So I'm just putting this in here so there's a little bit of a transition into the hair from the face, so it's not just a very hard line that I'm going to put in with a highlight that'll pop out way too much. You know, I want the highlights to be like in the middle of kind of like those like thick strands of hair. Because Jesus had hair of sheep's wool, right? Something like that. So I kind of wanted it to be a little bit thicker like that. I think the photo is pretty similar to this as well. So, you know, I'm just kind of just going what not only the photo reference was, but also just what feels right. Okay, so you can see it has a little bit more roundness up there where I was working in the hair. And you can see I'm just taking my time making sure that it's saturated. You know, it's not bleeding all over the place to where I'm tearing up the skin and it's going to scar all up or anything, but you know, you don't want to rush through it, not bring your shading all the way to, you know, the shading of your midtones all the way to your highlights, or not bring your highlights all the way to your midtones. You know, you want it to be a saturated piece, well, if that's what you're going for. A good technique, if you didn't want that everywhere, would be maybe like the back of the hair. You can, you know, have a little bit softer, kind of fade out a little bit, so that way it kind of pulls the background away from the sharpness of the foreground. You know, the nose, eyes, mouth mainly, eyebrows, kind of the front of the beard, how I was saying earlier, how I made the back of the beard just kind of like a blurry, shadowy effect. And then the front of the beard is where I have all the detail. And that was just, again, just to bring kind of some focus to the foreground of the face. So a good technique, if you wanted to, would be to soften up that background just to kind of help with that focus, that focal point, because I think it can help, but I felt that I did a good enough job with my focus on the face to where I didn't really worry too much about making the back too sharp, because I thought even if I make it sharp, I will have still my focus be on the features of the face, not so much the back of the hair. And like I said, I lightened it up a lot anyway, just to get that backlight source in there. Which again, if let's say that your light source from the right, you wanted to be kind of cool, you might want to do something similar right on the back end of the hair. You could do it a little bit lighter, so that way it's not as prominent as the front light source, but you know, it's just really up to you. Some people like two different light sources, which would be better if you had like a background maybe, but for this piece, like I said, I just went all warmth. And the reason I say to make it a little bit lighter in the back is because technically whenever light reflects off of anything, certain frequencies are absorbed into whatever it's reflecting off of. So technically you can have a second color coming right off the back of the head, or it could be a more dull color of whatever you're working with, or you know, there are all kinds of possibilities. Light works in funny ways, but Um, and it doesn't even have to make sense if it looks good. I mean, if you get your concept right, I mean, as long as it looks good, it's all about your tattoo looking good. It's just the quality of the work, and whether what you're putting where makes sense. You know, like I said, you want to have consistency to all of your decisions in your tattoo. Okay, so you can see we're not quite to the highlights yet, but we're getting really close to some of the highlights in the hair. And the reason I got the highlights in the face already is because I wanted it to really pop. You can see, for the most part, I'm trying to wipe away from the face, but if I ever wipe over it, if you missed it earlier in the video, uh, the light tones are not absorbing because the tattoo is not bleeding everywhere. So the skin is still real fresh. I could tattoo over that area a little bit more if I wanted to. I'm not sure how much more, but you can tell I have a little bit of play there still. And I'm just shaping the hair right now, similar to how I did on the neck in the beginning, how I did with the face, the nose, the eyes, you know, similarly, just starting with the shadows and getting my depth, making sure that my piece has value. The the only time when I really work backwards is when I'm trying to get, you know, my highlights and my midtones correct, and then I can always just work my shadows over that area just to make sure that my shadows come out far enough, or that my blends are perfect. There's all kinds of reasons why you might want to work backwards, but I'd say those are the main two. It also helps with saturation because you're going over the area a couple times, as long as you're not tearing up the skin, at least. You know, so, but in the hair right here, I'm just shaping it right now, making room for my highlights. And all I'm doing here is leaving the back, or the bottom rather, a little bit more open than the rest of the piece. Not a huge amount, but just adding a little something to it. And just working on a little twist in the hair with my mid-tone. Again, just shaping and making the way for highlights. And although I'm taking a lot of time on the hair, it's actually not the most important part of the piece, clearly. As I was explaining earlier, if you missed it, that's kind of like the mouth, the nose, the eyes, making sure that all your shadows match in the piece, all your highlights match. So even though I'm taking my time in this hair, I just am also trying to make it look good and finish the tattoo before this guy taps out, I guess. You know, you never want to cause more pain than you need to, and throw more work into something that you don't really need to. You know, tattoos can always look better. You know, it might not be perfect, but it's done. You know, so you want to spend your time on what's most important, and then get done what you can. If the person wants to come in for a second session or something, just to kind of refine, add some highlights over some of the midtones and such, and lighten up, then they're always welcome to do that. But you just want to make sure that they leave with as much of a completed piece as possible that looks as good as possible, with the focus where it needs to be, shadows where they need to be, highlights where they need to be, midtones just like I keep talking about, just that consistency, and just make sure that your tattoo is sharp where it needs to be sharp and smooth where it needs to be smooth. And you don't really want to make the hair look like crap either, because it's still a part of the tattoo. But it's just when it comes to the eyes of a tattoo, someone is going to be much happier with a tattoo that has decent finished hair and a beard than, let's say, a messed up nose, or one eye is higher than the other, or way too big, or and this tattoo, obviously, by the time it's done, it's not perfect either. There's still a little bit more that I could have done to it, but it was finished, and it's definitely good enough. You'll notice when you look back at a lot of your work, you might see a point in the tattoo that really disappoints you a little bit, and sometimes you get the chance to fix that, and sometimes you just learn from it, learn what to look out for next time. This is one of those tattoos where it took me a while to look at a couple things I didn't like, but in the end, I was still really happy with the piece, and I wish I could do more like this. And I'm not going to say what those things are, because that's all you'll look at. That's all you will see from now on. Okay, so I'm just working on the back of the hair right here, and making sure that it's just not one solid color. I still got some shape in here, but it's still, like I was saying earlier, kind of a simplified version of the hair. I'm just trying to have some flow to it and some shape, and just some depth like the rest of the tattoo, and just trying to make it look good, but not perfect. The front of the beard right there, and the mustache, I worked on my highlights there a little bit more, in the kind of like that lock look that I was talking about. Made it look real thick. A little bit more time there, because it's in that foreground. And as I was telling you earlier, if you missed it, this back of the hair, if it's a little bit softer, not as sharp, it can also kind of take or put a little bit more focus on that foreground. So even though I'm not just fading the hair out into the skin, a little bit less detail almost works similarly, to where it's a little bit more simple than the front. So your focus is still going to be kind of drawn into that front of the face. And you notice up top right here on this shadow, I'm not really putting any green up here, because I want to save the green, that darkest shadow, that takes away from the warmth, mainly for the areas that are against warm areas. So the green is mainly against the reds, and since I have earth tones up on this side, I really wanted to go with, the warmer shadow, that dark brown, uh, because it stands off against those light midtones a little bit more. Just because it's a little bit warmer. Yeah, I could have cut off some of this hair as well, probably, because it's getting a little repetitive, I'm sure, but you guys wanted real time, so here it is. And it still might help some of you because, I mean, some people might not have a very good idea of the motions of how to, do do hair. I wouldn't say properly, but like I said, in an acceptable manner. So you can see I'm putting a little bit more dark brown up here at the top, and just kind of making a highlight under these light curls that are going to be up here, or a shadow under these lighter locks of hair that are going to be at the top of the head right here. When you get to the end of this tattoo, or a long tattoo, any long tattoo that you do, it's important not to get anxious and start rushing. I know sometimes it could be difficult to sit there and finish something for, well, I think this one took me about 5.5 hours. Some tattoos take a lot longer. I guess it just depends on what you're doing, how much detail is there. But you definitely want to make sure that you're taking your time to where all of your saturation is on point and it all looks good. It'd be much easier to leave it like this if we were going to work it into something else, like a full chest piece, and we were going to work up on each side or something. But since it's just a single piece that the client came in for, I just, you gotta sit there, saturate it all, finish it all, and just take your time until the end. You don't want a very saturated beard and face and then come to the end and have some really sketchy hair, it could be, like I said, it's just hair. It can be a little bit more simplified because you don't want to take away from the face too much anyway, but you still want it to be saturated and look like it's done by the same artist, not someone got a face of Jesus and then later on got some hair added on by a different artist. Okay, real quick cleanup right here. You can see how it's starting to come together a little bit more. I like video because video really gives you a truer view of what the tattoo looks like than like photos usually do, unless you're really good at taking photos, which I am not. You can even see under the right lighting like how bright this tattoo gets. Very, very vibrant. And that's just all about saturation. Like I said, sometimes sometimes it's about just taking your time going over the area, and sometimes it means that you start with your lighter tones and just start working over it with your midtones and then your shadows, and then it's like you're touching up your own work before the client ever even comes back. If you have a good enough machine, and you know how to tattoo fairly well, you know how to do this technique well, then you should be able to do it without scabbing up, scarring up the skin or anything, causing a lot of bleeding. And that saturation can make a huge difference on how a tattoo looks, because a lot of like garage tattoos, I'm sure plenty of you have seen them, really have horrible saturation. They don't heal well, and you really don't want your work looking like that. You want it to look tip top. You want it to look smooth like this, not like it's done in the pen, you know, on on a 3 yard or something like that. You want to always make sure that you're giving it your best and you're taking your time to saturate, so that way it's a good representation of you and your ability. So you can see, same way that I started with some midtones, just kind of working in from the forehead into the hair, so I didn't jump straight into highlights. That's what I did right there, coming off the other side of the hair. So that way my highlights would kind of start at the top of that hair curve, not straight out of the shadow. Just give it a little bit of roundness there. And like I said, it's hair. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be saturated, have a little bit of flow to it. Kind of the same reason why we left just that kind of like dark green and gray kind of look to the back of the beard right there, just because we want it to be a little bit less focus on that area anyway. So you don't want to overdo it, especially not with the sharpness. If you notice, I haven't used a liner on any of this hair at all. Not even the beard, actually. It's because I want the hair to kind of blend together as much as possible, rather than be very hard lines that take all the focus and make you look at it. Plus, when you look at hair from a distance anyway, you don't usually see individual strands of hair. What you do see sometimes, though, especially if we had a different light source on here, you do see reflections of light in the hair. So some of these lighter areas, like on the front by the top of the head and right there by the forehead, it might be good to have a little bit of your right light source kind of glaring in that area, a little light, and also out of the back. You could also have a little light source kind of coming off the back of the hair as well. And by back, I don't mean just like the back line of the head. I mean everywhere that there isn't shadows, where we're leaving space for highlights. Like kind of here and there. You don't have to do it on every single highlight, but just like the consistency that I was talking about earlier. If you have highlights in here, you want to make sure that you use them in your piece. Same way, if I was going to throw a highlight in the top of the hair and right there by the forehead, I'd probably do the same thing where I have my highlights in the beard and maybe even the mustache right here. If I was going to do like a dark blue out the back, for example, the highlight that I have on the nose right between those two shadows, I might have even done that spot blue. Maybe even some blue off the brow of the nose a little bit, or right off of the eye, where that dark red is. Maybe even a little bit of blue kind of down below that dark red, kind of fading into the cheek, might have helped a little bit. And maybe even off of the dark red of the cheek. So that way, I have a little bit of blue kind of working on all of those shadow areas or off of the shadow areas. But like I said, as long as it's consistent, that's why I like to start with my shadows, so that way I have that map already laid out. Like, okay, this is where my shadows are. We're gonna work off of this. So that way, if you're working in that light source from a certain angle, you already know where you're gonna put it because your shadows are already there. You're kind of following a map that you already laid out. See there, I'm just working in some more mid-tone, trying to make it not too light right there. And you can see in the back I'm still just shaping, but instead of with my shadows like I was earlier, or like that dark green or that dark brown, I'm starting to shape a little bit more with my lighter mid-tone. That way I'm making room for my either dark highlights or lighter mid-tone. I'm just working into a lighter color. So I want my shadows back there to be a little bit lighter also, which they don't have to be. You can still have them pretty dark, but I'm just working a little bit lighter, just to kind of give it a little bit more depth in the hair. And you don't need to be afraid to use black either. A little bit of black right under the beard could have looked good. Coming into the back of the hair, by the neck and the beard, could have looked really good as well. I just mainly wanted to use it to give a little bit of sharpness to the piece, so I didn't want to use it too many places. That's why I only used it in the eyes, the pupil, and the nose, the nostril right there, and then everything else is definitely not black. But like I said, wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. I just didn't want to draw too much focus away from the eyes and the nose and the mouth. I put a little bit of black in the top lip as well. If you missed it earlier, just over like the red that I put, so that way, I darken it up. It's very shadowed for under the beard, and just because it's a top lip anyway. And then also, when it heals up, you're still going to see that red, through that black, because I didn't do it real solid, especially not in the middle. It's a little bit more solid right under the mustache, but for the most part, I just kind of, still just as deep as the rest of the ink. I didn't just like tap the skin, but I added it in kind of like a deeper, like quicker motion with little passes, to where it added like some black dots in there that mixed kind of the red dots and the black dots to add like the perception of a dark red. If you missed it earlier, kind of like pixels on a computer, or cross-hatching different colors in like pen or pencil or color pencil or something like that. You could get different colors by overlapping colors or having colors next to each other when you view them from a certain angle or from a certain distance, depending on how close or far apart they are, such like that. Same thing, depends on how many dots are in there, or how much black, how many passes of black that I put in there. But either way, it's always at a consistent depth. Okay, so still just shaping with my mid-tone here. And you know, it might seem like I'm putting a lot of time into this hair right here, but it was actually one of the quickest parts of this tattoo. I mainly put a lot of time into, you know, the face, the eyes, making sure that, you know, they're good, the nose, mouth, front of the beard, even the shading on the cheek and such. It took a little bit more time on forehead just to make sure that you know, I darken it up as much as I want to, but not too dark. Lovely perk of the hawk is when you try to twist your hand and it changes the length of the throw. So you'll see me adjust it every now and then. It's always fun. A bigger problem when you gotta move around a lot because you got a camera in the way. Okay, so you can see it's almost done here. I just really have some highlights to kind of get in, you know, here and there. So I'll be jumping into the highlights finally in a little bit, and then that's when you can kind of start to see, you know, the hair come together more similar to how you did the face. And it's mainly because, you know, how I've said many times in the video, you want your shadows to kind of give shape to the piece, some contrast, some depth, really just to give value to the piece. And then you want your midtones and your highlights to kind of work off of them and just, you know, add a little bit of extra. But you don't want to skimp on your shadows, basically, is where I'm going with that. And then once you add your midtones, it's gonna just really like come to life just right there. Like on someone with skin as light as this, I mean, you could even leave out highlights, and their skin would be the highlight. So it just depends on, you know, how you want to work. As long as you blend into it nicely. Like if we would have left it like this, I probably would have just worked a little bit of mid-tone into the top of the mustache, and we technically could have almost called it a day right here. Especially if he was sore, most people would look at a piece like this and say, "Oh yeah, that you know, that tattoo's done and it looks good." But he didn't tap, so we're going. A lot of the times I leave a tattoo a little bit messier than this, even though it's all messy up top, just for the sake of, you know, the client's pain tolerance. Sometimes if you start over wiping, it can kind of hurt people a little bit. The green soap can start hurting them. You know, betadine can only do so much, so you just don't want to, overhurt your client and force them to not finish either, because you want to make sure that you get your highlights in. So you can see here that he's getting a little sore, so I'm going into my midtones and just trying to, refine a little bit just in case. And just kind of smooth out a little bit more if possible to where my highlights aren't as prominent. And when you work in your highlights, sometimes it really helps to have only a small area of skin that's actually fresh skin, and then kind of like the, little dots, not scraping the skin again, but at a consistent depth as the rest of the piece, but few passes of a midtone almost up to that highlight, so that way there's a smooth transition between, your shadow all the way up to your highlight. Like I said earlier, unless it's a very hard light, like very direct light, in which case it might be better to have a very sharp highlight. So this is the white that I said that I usually don't put into tattoos. You can see it makes it pop a little bit, only because his skin tone is so light. White's usually not the best idea, but since he has a really good skin tone for it, figured what the heck. And there's no better machine than a Hawk to do that anyway. Or I guess anything with the plastic tip, anything that runs real soft. You can see there's not a lot of blood kind of coming out of the white. It actually looks white, just because I'm running the Hawk so low, just like I did the rest of the tattoo. Then I think after this we'll go down to the collar. Now by this time, I'm sure I just moved to a round shader just to get these white tones in. And you don't only have to go over the blank areas where you left room for highlights. You can also lighten up some of your midtones by mixing those two colors. Could be really helpful to do that, because then it's going to give you a different tone than your pure white, but also a separate tone than that midtone alone. So you can see right here, I have I think a mag-on for this part that I'm actually shading white over ink just to kind of lighten up some of that ink. So it's not going to stay like a really vibrant white. It'll just end up being a lighter version of whatever color's there than what doesn't have white. So it's a very subtle way of doing, a highlight. And you can see that sometimes once you get things done, you want things a little bit darker. So never a bad idea to just go darken up a few spots, just like I lightened up with the white. You can darken up with darker tones still. Feel free to add me on Facebook, follow me on Instagram, and email if you're interested in getting any artwork done. And thank you very much again for watching.